Yes, yes. Yes, I think very deeply. I think very deeply. I think very deeply. I think very deeply.
In about 4 seconds, a teacher will begin to speak.
I think very deeply.
Let us begin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Williams. Welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is going to be a real class about Black history, Black literature, for Black people, by Black people. It's time for us to take control of our own narrative, teach our own history to our children. Because up to now, we have left it up to public school systems and other people to teach our history. And right now, Black people are struggling when it comes to these discussions about Black history. And we have false narratives going around about slavery, about the civil rights movement, about what Malcolm X stood for, about what Martin Luther King stood for, about who Louis Farrakhan is, and just all kind of things going on about Black history. But this channel, we're going to sort all of that stuff out. I'm not going to leave it up to you to do your research. I'm going to help you along, tell you what books we need to be reading, what articles we need to be reading, and where to find these articles. It's not going to be a whole bunch of Google this and Google that and .com. We're going to look at peer-reviewed articles, and I'm going to show you how to get your hands on these peer-reviewed articles, and you need to read these. Everything that you need to know about Black history is not found on the internet, because the internet is not controlled by us as well. I'm currently reading 1984, and it shows us that how everything is just being, how our history is just being changed right before our eyes. We get that when we look at police videos and police beatings. We're sitting there looking at stuff with our own eyes, and then the narrative behind it is telling you that what you see with your own eyes is not what you see. But this is going to be a class. It's going to be a Black literature, Black history class where I'm going to tell you what books we need to be reading, how to read them, and what to be looking for and where you can find these. We just can't leave. We can't leave our history to be taught to us by others. We're struggling right now when it comes to that. You have the school systems telling us, you came over here as slaves. Abraham Lincoln freed you. And you had a civil rights movement. Martin Luther King gave a "I Have a Dream" speech, and now we're trying to live that dream. Black people always wanted to integrate with white people, and but they don't tell you that the minority of Black people were for integration. The majority of Black people did not want to integrate. The majority of Black people just wanted to be left alone by white folks. White folks wouldn't leave us alone. By the time Martin Luther King died, he abandoned his nonviolent movement, and he said that I felt like I was integrating my people into a burning house, and he was assassinated. Malcolm X never wanted to integrate with white people, and he was assassinated. Langston Hughes, you read his stories and his poems, he was not 100% for integration. Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, I'm going to read a letter from her. She was not for integration. The majority of Black people were not for integration, because how can you go from being a slave and being treated like an animal and then think that these people wanted to integrate with you? No, they wanted to be left alone. But they don't teach you that in school. They always teach when it comes to Black people, they always want the slavery, nonviolent integration. I have a dream, and that's all you learn. That's it. You don't learn anything else about Black history. But we're going to walk through different books. We're going to look at literature, and we're going to look at autobiographies and biographies, and we're also going to look at documents written during slavery. We're going to look at slave narratives. We're going to look at Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs and other slave narratives to find out about slavery from the slaves themselves. Who better to learn it from than from the slaves? Instead of some white teacher in school who never read a slave narrative, read about 3 or 4 sentences about a slave narrative and then tell you, oh, slaves wanted to be freed and Abraham Lincoln freed them. No, slavery was violent. Slaves were not all subservient. Nat Turner was not the only slave revolt. If you read Frederick Douglass, he had multiple fights with slave masters, risking his life. Linda Brent was a female slave, and she tells you what women had to endure and their thoughts about each other. Frederick Douglass didn't talk too much about what he thought of other slaves, but Linda Brent, she gave a great she wrote great prose about what she thought about other slaves and black men, which you might find a little bit uncomfortable. There's going to be many things that we're going to read in this class that are uncomfortable, from lynchings to beatings, but then we're going to also read a lot of empowering things about black people in the arts, black people in politics, and black people inventing things, and black people coming out on top. And we're going to learn the real history in this class. And we're going to look at the real literature in this class. And we're going to look at things that don't even involve white people. We're going to look at many things that are being discussed by black people today that were discussed 100 years ago, and we still haven't come to an answer, because when they have their discussions back then and they arrive to an answer and they reach a solution and they write about it, we don't pick up those books and read it. You can't find everything on the internet, and many things that you find on the internet are going to be false. So again, I'm going to show you about, for example, they like to tell you that the Europeans didn't go to Africa and capture slaves and pillage villages and destroy villages and things like that. But I have the documentation written by the Puritans about what went on over in Africa when they were capturing slaves, killing Africans, destroying their villages. So we're going to get the facts. And but when we start out, this class is going to start out with, in the 1930s, a book by Langston Hughes called The Ways of White Folks. When we hear about Langston Hughes, mostly what we hear about is his poetry. I'm not a big fan of poetry, but when we do go over poetry, I'm gonna have some other people with me to analyze it and go over it with you. But we're going to start out with Langston Hughes' short stories in the ways of white folks. And the first story we're going to look at is a story called Home, written in 1934. Home, in a book called The Ways of White Folks. And it's a story about a young man named Roy Williams, who's a violinist who gets sick and he wants to come home to visit his mother before he dies. And it talks about what he encounters. And this is a very short story, very good story, and we're going to get into that with the next video. Again, this is Black Literature, Black History. I'm Jason Williams, and this is going to be one of the realest channels that you've ever come to. I don't expect to get too many views to begin with, because it's hard to get black folks to start learning about their own history, because it requires work and it requires you to sit down, look at a book, and it requires you to think. But we're not only going to just discuss that, we're going to get into literary theory and everything like that, because I'm a new historicist myself, which means that when a writer writes a story, what he puts in his story is a reflection of what he is going through during his current time period. No matter what time period he's writing about, whatever he's writing about, his on the conscious and subconscious level, he is putting into that work what he is currently, the time period that he is currently living in. So we're going to discuss these authors, what they're writing, what their discussions are, the time period that they're living in, and ultimately we're going to relate it to today, because you'll be surprised to know that what they were going through back 100 years ago, we're still going through today. Michelle Alexander wrote The New Jim Crow. Most black people know what Jim Crow was. Some people don't know what Jim Crow was, so I'm going to explain that. But that was going on 100 years ago, and it's still going on today. One fact I want to leave you with is that the 13th Amendment said that slavery is abolished except for those who are prisoners. Prisoners are legally slaves. And there are more black men in prison now more black men in prison now than there were slaves back during slavery. So slavery hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it's only gotten worse. And we're gonna also look at these FBI statistics because white people like to always say, "Well, look at the statistics. This is what the statistics say." Well, we're going to look at these statistics and analyze the statistics so we know what we're looking at. So slavery has never ended for black people with the prison system, but we're going to look at all of that. But we're going to start off in the 1920s and 1930s, and then analyze that, and then we're going to move forward, and we're going to, and then when we hit in the new historicism and the different links and the postmodernism of that, we're going to move back to slavery, and we're going to look at everything and just keep it moving. Again, this is Black Literature, Black History. My name is Jason Williams. See you on the next video.